The number one question that I get asked is, when should I start a second Etsy store? Now that is an awesome question, because when we're selling digital products, we are working on a business model that can really compound over time. So we can actually make our first store, set it up in a way where it's generating income and it's running on autopilot and it's sort of humming along nicely. And then we can go ahead and replicate what we've done sort of for a different niche in a second store. Then we can do a third store, a fourth store, and so on and so forth. And all those stores, they're going to add together into one big income. And every time you do it, you're going to make more. So it is definitely a cool business model. I love it. It's awesome to be making income on autopilot, but there are a couple of pitfalls. So I wanted to make a quick video to help you guys understand when you might be ready to do a second store. So the first thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is profit. Now, obviously, profit is important because we want to be paid. Even though we're probably doing something we love, we want to be paid and we want to actually be able to do more of what we love. So we want to make sure that that profit margin is really strong. Now, another reason for this is once we sort of grab that store and we put it on autopilot and it's sort of humming along, we want to make sure that profit margin is way above the level of the fees on Etsy, because we don't want those fees to creep up and overtake that profit margin and you end up losing money on autopilot. That would be the worst. So the first thing that I want to highlight is profit has to be strong before you start a second store. Now, a common pitfall that I see a lot of people doing is they'll sort of start up one store and they'll put 10 products in it and it's going well, but then they'll get really excited because they've thought of another great idea and they start a totally new store and they put 10 products in that, and then they'll think of another idea and they start another store and then another store and another store, and they've got all these stores all over the place, but because they don't have many products and they haven't sort of finished what they started, nothing's amounted to anything and they get really frustrated. So I always recommend sort of doing an overall plan for your store and what you actually want to achieve from that store. Include financial targets, include product number targets, and make sure you actually hit those targets and sort of finish that store before you move on to the next one. We want to make sure that each store that we make reaches its full potential, because we want to make sure that each store we make reaches its full potential. That's really important, because obviously if you're investing your time, you want to be paid back, and that only happens if we sort of put all our energy into something and make it really, really good and then move on to the next thing. One of the common justifications I hear for students wanting to start a new store is they want to sell something totally different. But I think that's a little bit of a misconception that you have to have a different store for every different thing that you sell. For example, you might have planners in your store and you might want to sell logos. These could actually go in the same store because they're pulling in the same sort of broad niche of people. Now, because Etsy is a search engine based site, it's actually pulling in that traffic for you. So it's pulling all the customers in for you. You don't actually have to build a community, nurture that community, and then sell to that community. Because it's search engine based, your tags are going to do the work for you instead of you having to sort of manually nurture your audience. So as long as those tags are sort of bringing people from that broad audience and everything in that store is sort of generally relevant to them, I think it's totally fine, especially if your first store is very small and you're wanting to expand to logos, for example. Add those logos into your planner store and just see how they go. If they take off, then you might want to do a second store. If, for example, you get thousands and thousands of products, you might want to do a second store then. It's sort of once we sort of build things up, test the waters, that's when we can sort of transfer to that next store and build that one up, and so on and so forth. Etsy obviously loves you opening multiple stores, but there's just two things that you need to remember. So the first thing is you can't just duplicate your listings from your first store and put them in your second store. It goes against Etsy policy, and they'll probably shut your store if you do that. So definitely make new products for your store. You can't just grab your old ones, reskin them and put them in your new store. It's just not allowed. And the second thing to remember is you need to make it clear that you are the owner of the multiple stores, and you can do this by adding all your stores into your profile and just sort of linking them and describing what they are. And Etsy just requests that you do this if you have multiple stores, just to make sure that customers are clear on the fact that you have multiple stores and they can shop with you in a couple of different ways. So important to do those two things. recap. So the first thing we need to remember is making sure our first store is running at a decent profit. And again, it needs to be a decent profit. Can't just be borderline, because we don't want those fees to overtake the profit margin and it to be running at a loss on autopilot. That would be the worst. So make sure it's running at a great profit. Number 2, make sure that you have made a plan for your store and you have completed that plan before you move on to your second store. And that is because we don't want to be sort of abandoning something half finished. We want it to reach its full potential before we move on to that second store. Now, number 3, we want to make sure that we are not using duplicate listings, because that's against Etsy's policy, and we will probably have our second store or our first store or all our stores closed if we use duplicate listings. So make sure you're making new listings as you go along and make your new store. And of course, connect all your stores via your profile and just make sure you've got them all linked, explaining what they are and making it clear to your customers. So thank you so much for watching. That is all from me today. If you enjoyed what you saw, then definitely subscribe to my channel. I bring out new videos every single week, all about Etsy and digital products, passive income, and online marketing. So I would love you to be part of my community. Definitely subscribe below. I also run a small mastermind, which you can join. It's called Digital Product Mastermind. I'll add the link to that below as well. Again, thank you so much for watching. I will see you guys next week. Goodbye.